All right, good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to another edition of a Google Plus Hangout for Channels Beam. I am Victor Matthias, and today we're looking at how African democracies have evolved over time. There was an election that was held in Gambia not too long ago, and the president has been in place for over 22 years, and yet he was able to concede defeat and just say he will hand over the baton of power to the president-elect. Well, that seems to be now the norm in Africa. I think the stateside attitude is now beginning to fade away. Well, joining me to look at that, we have Orisa Yakubu, who joins us from Nigeria's Federal Capital Territory. Thanks for coming on the program.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. And we also have Victor Bamishai, who joins us from Ukraine, Lviv specifically. Thanks as well for coming on the program.
You're welcome. Thank you for having me.
Sure. All right, boys, let me start with you. I mean, like they say, let me give you the home advantage. What would you say? I mean, over time, African democracy, how much of it has evolved now?
Well, I would like to commend our African leaders of in recent times. The norm of clinging to power and playing do or die politics is gradually, fading away. And when people lose elections, they tend to concede and congratulate the president-elect. But on the issue of democracy as a whole, I would say, considering it's over 5 decades after independence, and we are still where we are in the present state in Africa, I would say we are doing very poorly democratically in the continent as a whole. Take into consideration, there is a survey on Afrobarometer on the perceptions of individual perceptions, demand and supply of democracy. Over 43 correspondents across 28 countries claim that Africa has a democracy with minor problems, while 67%, on the other hand, claim that it's either not a democracy or a democracy with major problems. But for us to be able to comprehend the issue of how far we've gone democratically in Africa, first we need to understand what does democracy entail. Because most countries now, people tend to fit their tent under the umbrella of democracy with the minimal criteria of elections, and most of these elections are not necessarily free and fair. So for us to be able to call a country a democracy, first of all, you need to consider that, okay, there's a free, fair, contested periodic elections. There are other norms of democracy, such as freedom of association, liberty, there's individual liberty, and all those are concepts that is practiced in the Western democracy. In Africa, let me say this categorically: when the president of Nigeria, the then president Goodluck Jonathan, lost the election.
Okay, all right. If you can step back a bit, if you can relax. Yeah, okay. Go ahead. So you said in Africa.
All right. When the then president of Nigeria lost the election to the incumbent now of APC, there was a lot of applause on the social media, amongst others, said that yes, the president has done well for conceding and calling to. Well, it is the norm. You lost a free and fair election. You should call. It should not be something we should commend them over. And I would say Africa has never been democratic as it was preceding the independence, because then there was a united front. Africans wanted to build. They wanted to get past the colonial imperialism that has held us back democratically. But now, if you look at the whole scene of politics in Africa in general, we have seceded or regressed from a national front of politics and to a more ethnic, controlled, religion affiliated, amongst other social cleavages. Our politics, instead of gearing towards a national front of developing a country, it's been channeled, and it has been passed through this other channel, and individuals are being mobilized through these other channels. Also, there is a study of modernization and how democracy is related to development. First of all, this theory explains that democracy is either endogenously or exogenously related to development. It's either development brings about democracy, or democracy brings about development. But it works hand in hand. Okay, the democratic wave that swept the African continent, I would say, came as a result of end of colonialism. So that theory doesn't explain our accession to democracy, but it explains explains our inability to develop, because it says when the country is not modernized in terms of urbanization, industrialization, high literacy level education, even an equal distribution of wealth, amongst other factors, when a country has not met these conditions, it is less likely to be a democracy. And what is the basis that most African countries now claim to be a democracy? Mostly two parties, dominant parties, and the channel through which the candidates of most of these parties emerge to represent Nigerians, it's not necessarily Nigerians and other Africans alike, it's not necessarily free and fair. So democracy as a whole, in theory, it is a very beautiful form of governance, but in practice, not just in Africa, around the world, it's a pity we rarely can call a country to be fully democratic today in the world.
All right. Well, that was a very long one, a detailed explanation of the phenomena of democracy, first of all, itself. But then Victor Bamshai has been standing by, of course, listening to your own submission as to how far we've gone and where we are in terms of how our democratic systems are. Victor, let me come to you. What do you make of the situation as it were?
In Africa, I think we're talking about Africa, right?
Yes, yes, please.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. I think, as it were, right now, we are making huge and tremendous progress. We are living the era of totalitarianism, where a ruler is absolute in nature. And when you consider Gambia, where the election was just held, you'll find out that the man has been there for 22 years. So we should be able to at least attribute it to a trend that is taking over the whole scope and landscape of Africa for people to start conceding defeat. And I think it's high time. I think it's applaudable. I think it's something we should, that gives hope that totalitarianism and absolutism is something that is fading away in Africa. And you see, the truth about democracy is that for everywhere democracy has visited, it comes along with one thing, and which is very necessary, and that is called inclusive economy. Wherever inclusive economy is, there is growth and development. And so where you have democracy practiced to the fullest, not just one aspect of it, which is electioneering, but the whole system of government and how government is being, how governance is being performed in a democratic manner, you'll find out that development cannot evade such nation. So I think Africa is coming out of the shadows, and we are coming into the light, and development will soon be our anthem.
Well, I hope development becomes our anthem as soon as possible. But then Olumuyiwa Mao joins us from Dunedin in New Zealand. Thanks for coming on the program.
You're welcome, sir.
Yeah, well, I mean, I know you're like far ahead of us. It should be Monday now in the other, like down under. They call those areas down under. Anyways, back to the focus of the day. We're looking at how democracy has grown over the years in Nigeria. I mean, let's just take a look back. Even though Oris has given us a very detailed a background going 5 decades, but let's take a look at 1 decade ago, where we were and how far we have come now.
Well, to begin with, I think that the problem with democracy in Africa isn't because it is not working. It is because we have had leaders who have chosen not to allow it to work. Over the last 55, 56 years of the golden decade of African independence, we have seen a situation where our first generation leaders post-independence had pretty good plans for their people. And unfortunately, the subsequent ones that came after them saw the seat of power as their personal property, and as such refused to do the needful by quitting or allowing the full course of democracy to set it to be at play. So Africa has done pretty badly until the last 10, 15 years, when we started seeing a few changes across sub-Saharan Africa. In the northern part of Africa, democracy isn't even working at all there, because it's a zone or a geopolitical zone which doesn't conform with the norms of democracy, which instead chooses to be ruled or governed by the dictates of a particular religion. We have had democracy thrive in the Central African and Central Africa. We have had it thrive in West Africa. We have had it thrive in Southern Africa. But we mustn't also forget that these things didn't come at a cheap price. And this thrive of a thing that I'm talking about only happened the last 10, 15 years. The Southern African region, for instance, couldn't tell what democracy was all about until apartheid fully left its course. And the most recent example being in South Africa in 1994. The same thing happened in Namibia and et al. In West Africa, it's been a crisis-prone sub-region where we have fought civil war for the major part of the West African countries' independence. In East Africa, yes, we have seen very good examples of how democracy can work in Tanzania, in Uganda, etc., depending on how you want to define it. So it's been a mixed bag of tail, if you like it. It's not been rosy, as so many people think, and it hasn't been bad also. I think that the problem which democracy has had in Africa generally, and Africa now excludes the northern African part of the continent, the problem it's had is that Africans as a people have a different way of being. Our lifestyle, our history, our orientation, our nature as a people doesn't conform with the westernized culture or practice of democracy. We have had that indigenous system of government which Africans tend to believe in. And when democracy came, many of us or many of them saw it as an opportunity to resist that movement because it was painted as another sign of colonialism, and that really affected the pace at which democracy could have grown. So I think that moving forward, there is some positive lining or positive silver lining, if you like. Things can get better if you allow institutions to thrive and if people respect the simple ethos and ethics of what it means to be a democratic state.
All right, very well. Just before you came, and always made reference to how President Goodluck Jonathan congratulated President Buhari after President Buhari won the election, and just recently again we saw how President Jammeh congratulated President-elect Barrow. Now, it seems the issue of state-titism is now beginning to fade, or is beginning to just go under the bridge and wash down with the water. What could be responsible for this change in African politics?
No, I don't think so. I don't think that things are changing. I rather believe that those things happened because those two individuals you just mentioned, former President Goodluck Jonathan and Yahya Jammeh of the Gambia, saw it as the needful. In any case, we mustn't begin to pour unnecessary accolades on people who lose elections and then decide to accept defeat and congratulate the winner. In normal crimes, in civilized crimes, that's the normal thing to do. As a political scientist, I will be the last person to begin to shy encomiums on somebody who stood or who stands for election and loses. Once you stand for election and you lose, what democracy teaches, and indeed what democracy argues, is that in the spirit of sportsmanship, you must find ways of conceding defeat and congratulating your winner. In former President Goodluck Jonathan's case, I'm not unsure that he had so many options. Of course, the next available option would have been for him to go the other way by refusing to concede defeat, and perhaps Nigeria could have been in crisis, and we may not have been in crisis. But I don't really think it's anything special from a political scientist's point of view. From our thinking as a people, yes, it may be special because we aren't used to that in Africa. I think the one that strikes me as perhaps more important was Yahya Jammeh's concession of defeat. The Gambia, for the better part of its independence, has been under one man after Yahya Jammeh overthrew the military leader in the Gambia. And for more than 22 years, the Gambia has been under Yahya Jammeh. So for Yahya Jammeh to lose an election and concede defeat that easily, with all the state powers and resources he has garnered and he's been in control of over the last 22 years, speaks volume of this kind of person, slightly contrary to the kind of thing the kind of view I used to see him with. So I don't think it's anything special. I don't think it's what congratulating each other about. I think we must commend them, yes, as statesmen for respecting democracy and its tenets, but to begin to see them as extraordinary being, if you ask me, I think it's uncalled for. So it's a good thing, but certainly not what singing praises about. For Africa moving forward, I think it does tell us how beautiful our future can be, or the future of the continent can be, in terms of us being fully democratic. I think it's a good omen, and it's a sharp departure from what used to happen in those days of African crisis, when we had conflicts every now and then. So I think it speaks well for us as a continent, and it shows that Africans can at least find African solutions and problems with their own issues. So moving forward, we'll see how it goes.
All right, Beryl, just before we continue, let's welcome Ben. Ben joins us from Kuala Lumpur. That's in Malaysia. Ben, thanks for coming on the program. Actually, a bit of water has gone on the bridge before you came on board. We're trying to see how much or where at the moment African democracy we can say African democracy is. What is your take? To what extent would you say we've grown since most of the countries gained independence?
I think since Nigeria has set a very good example for other African nations to follow, and like what happened in the Gambian, I myself was quite surprised. I thought it was going to be something of kind of bloodshed. Looking at the record of Yahya Jammeh and how people have spoken bad of him, journalists are being arrested. I mean, some kind of illegalities going on in the system, and he considered defeat. Is a good thing for the Gambians, and I must say congratulations to them, and congratulations to the president also for conceding defeat, because it's. I was so surprised when I saw it on breaking news. I was like, did this thing really happen? About knowing his strong criticism for the Western world, and he's not even happy with some of the Western policies, and he has not been a good time with them, and all that has happened, and he still allowed this to happen. The elections to be free, fair, and credible to some extent. I think is a good thing, and that shows that we are developing, we are getting matured, and we shouldn't see public office as a birthright where you can stay there for the rest of your life, or your family members stay there 20-30 years. I think is a good thing, and that shows that we are beginning to grow, and we are developing just little by little. We're still waiting for the likes of Robert Mugabe and the rest of them to also face out, because things are really changing. Things are really changing, and our democracy in Africa is getting stronger and stronger. With the kind of revolution that is going on, and people are getting more enlightened, people are getting more educated, and people are exposed to vital informations, and so this is really helping. It's really helping Africans a lot, and so I believe with time, Africa will have a very strong democratic system where we will no longer have one person stay in power for too long, for 20, 15, even 20, 22 years. I mean, it will this kind of thing. I think Nigeria has gone past the stage, and I think we are progressing. Is a step in the right direction, and I believe that the next president of Gambia will come in and see how he can reform the system, and see how we can lay down new rules, and also not stay too long like Jammeh. Sometimes when they get into power, they what they preach once they get into power and they're carried away, they begin to misbehave. That has been one of our major problems. And when you ask the person to leave, he says no, he won't leave. And I believe with this new development on board, I think democracy in Africa, in West Africa, in Gambia, and other parts of Africa will stabilize. We are also hoping that Ghana will take the same step also. All eyes are in Ghana to see what is happening there, and I hope they will also do the same thing, and so that we can be able to have a peaceful society. Enough of this bloodshed because of power tussle. Enough of illegalities and political rascality in governance. Enough of all this, so that people can be able to say yes, this is who we want, and this is who we can hold accountable in case if anything goes wrong in the system. Not when one person hijack the whole system and he wants to be the lord of everything. I'm so happy for them. I must say congratulations to the Gambians.
All right. Okay, very well. Again, congratulations to the Gambians, and like you said, we hope Ghana comes into place and also take the same step. But then, always, let me come to you now. So we've been talking about the evolution now, but Muiwa made mention of how the leaders in Africa are just not wanting to implement these policies that will make us have this democracy that is practicable or that is being practiced in Western world. What, or in saner times, now to quote him, what exactly are those? I mean, how do we move from where we were to where we want to be or where we ought to be? What are the stages? How can we, implement them without hassles?
Okay. Thank you very much, Victor. Like I earlier said, democracy and development go hand in hand. First of all, for us to be able to move from where we are to where we ought to be or where we desire to be, we need to take into consideration the level of industrialization and development in Africa. We are way behind. We produce most of the natural resources needed for most of the finished and consumable goods, but we are unable to process these materials. And also the issue of the resource wealth and democratic cost. If you look at other regions that have similar resources, like the Middle East now that has a lot of oil reserves, it's just, if not for Saudi Arabia and the United Arab, there's no relativity in these resource-rich countries. And there's a theory that claims that resources and natural resources and democracy do not necessarily go hand in hand. So while our leaders are playing presidential supremacy instead of constitutional supremacy, hold us back from being from democratization, also we need to consider outside elements that are benefiting from failure of democracy in Africa. Most of the Western nations depend on our resources to run their economy, either energy or gas, you name it. So if there is a working system, the channels and avenues through which these resources are gotten is going to be much more rigid. So first we need to consider the issue of resources and democracy. We need to consider the presidential supremacy that we have. And we as Africans need to check our attitude towards democracy. There is a survey that says 35 only out of 26 leading economies in Africa, only 32% of the population of this 26 believe that democracy is actually going to bring about a positive development to them. So we as Africans need to change our attitude towards democracy. And also there's a very huge gap for us to break this democracy and whatnot. We need to consider a system that is all inclusive, because if you take, for instance, Nigeria, now we have two dominant parties that produce candidates in the last election. What is the medium through which these candidates were presented? If democracy is truly free and fair, why do we need to limit the avenue through which people are meant to choose their representatives? There should be they should review the constitution as regards the election-wise to give room for candidates to emerge without necessarily being backed by any political party. Because by giving us two candidates, we are already limiting our options. So that's a very questionable democracy there again, because you are giving us two to choose of which democracy does not necessarily give a limitation among the people whom you are to choose. So there's a lot to be done. I will also commend the Gambians, and I will also not, I won't fail to say that we as Africans have tried our best, considering the factors and other mitigating issues that have stopped us from democratization. We are trying our best, but we are way behind. First of all, for us to get this democracy, we need to develop. How do we get? We need to work on our industrialization. There's a need to eradicate literacy level. There's a need to sensitize people and change their mindset towards democracy. Because the average Nigerian today, if you say this leader is not working well, this is that, you're like, by the grace of God, next year we change another person. Why don't you think, in what capacity myself as a Nigerian or an African, how can I contribute to the development of my own country? You don't have to sit back. You have a right as a citizen to in a system that encompasses for inclusiveness, representation, and responsiveness. So there is a need. The problem with the democracy is not just from the top, but the rot has gone around the whole continent, if I may say this, because the top leading economies of Africa, the respondents from a survey that was carried out there showed how people view democracy or how people's perception of democracy were. And the major mitigating factor I would like to mention again is the informal institutions, our patronage and clientelism and nature of our big man policy. This has hindered us. If you take a look at Nigerian political arena today, we basically have seen the same people being recycled over and over and over again. Are we saying that aside these people that present themselves, Nigeria, a country of more than 170 million people, we don't have more competent representation? We cannot have, more competent representatives. You know, there's a very huge gap. Our mindset is that these are the people that we want. Why don't we shift it? We have given these people numerous opportunities, and the same is happening over and over. And if we give them, it is likely to happen again. So there's a need to restructure the electoral act to give room for independent candidates if we're actually planning to head towards a more democracy. Because even in one of the most influential political parties in Africa today, we have different factions. So how do you give a candidate from a party that does not have internal democracy and expect this candidate to be democratic while in a public office?
Wow, sounds interesting. But then let me just come back to Lumuyiwa to ask, how ready do you think this country is? Because Ois is raising the issue of the Electoral Act being amended to include the issue of independent candidates. To what extent would you say we are ready for such in this country or even in Africa?
Well, before I go into that analysis, let me say that there is no clear-cut relationship, as Ois mentioned, contrary to what Ois mentioned, between democracy and development. Those two things are different entirely. One of the very few examples of what development means is what we're seeing in China and what we used to see in former Libya under Muammar Gaddafi. Libya was never democratic under Gaddafi and still had some of the highest coefficients in terms of standard of living, employability, employment, infrastructure, etc. in the world. China today is a communist state, and China has one of the most developed infrastructures in the world. While I agree 100% that democracy offers a better opportunity, when I say us, I mean the masses, to decide those who govern them, in terms of analysis and economic terms and political terms at times, actually, development can happen without democracy. That said, for Africa, I think we might not have that opportunity to see development without democracy, because as a people, I am tempted to argue that most of our leaders and indeed followers are a greedy set of people. And that's why it will be difficult for us to have development without democracy, because democracy is a spare to checkmate them and cut their excesses. That said, I 100% agree with the fact that we should have room for independent candidacy in future elections in Africa. That would have been perfect. It means anybody on the street can decide, once you meet the minimum conditions, to take up forms and aspire to get anywhere you want to. But the problem with Africa is not independent candidates. The problem with Africa is structural. It's systemic. Deliberately, those who have had the opportunity to dictate who gets what, who and how and when, have coerced the people in such a way that their thinking and their political beliefs are structured along their own lines of thoughts. And that is what we have been fortunate to endure over the last 50 years. Except for the first generation of African leaders, those who succeeded the first generation of African leaders, precisely from 1970s upwards, developed the pattern. It developed the patrimonial pattern where people are divided into two classes, the classes of those who have and those who don't have. And then it became a class system where the people who have are the political lords, the elites, and the people who don't have are the masses. And because you don't have, the system deliberately makes sure that you wouldn't have, so that you can become subservient and subject to the authority of those who have. So even if you do have independent candidates, the thinking is that, or the possibility is there that you will not win an election because you don't have the structure. And by the structure, I mean you don't have the money, you don't have the connection, you don't. Well, you may have the people, but if you don't have the money and you don't have the relevant connections, it will be difficult for foot soldiers to move. And when your foot soldier do sincerely decide to move, it again becomes difficult for you to win an election and be sworn in because the system will be all against you. So I think the first step would be for us as a continent to go back to our system and de-emphasize the kind of comfort and the kind of prestige that we arrogate to African leaders, make those offices less attractive. What that does is that it whittles down the interest that these lords, political lords, have in such offices, and then they can relax their stronghold on the ordinary people. And then we can talk about dependent candidates having the opportunity to thrive. That, for me, is where we should start from. Unless and until African political positions or African political offices are not made as attractive as they presently are, I do not think that African independent candidates in our part of the world would be able to emerge. People look at what happens in the US, etc. But even in the United States, it's been a long time that we had an independent emerge as president because the structures and the system wouldn't just even allow you. So if people look at such examples and those things are difficult to happen, I cannot imagine how that will happen in Africa. What would happen, and as a closing remark, is that independent candidates may emerge as the winners of elections in Africa. They would not be allowed, he or she would not be allowed to be sworn in. And when that happens, a chaos occurs. And when chaos occurs, then Africa gets back to its wide era. So I think we should look at it from that strand and then see how we can make amends moving forward. It's a system that has been created to make that office look attractive and to make some people poorer and some people richer. Let's settle that first, and then we can talk about independent candidates. But it's a good omen anyway if that happens.
All right. Or is it looking like you want to say something?
Yes, Mr. Muya, as a political scientist, that we don't see any correlation between democracy and development. Not a communist state. And have you looked at the economic structure of China? The only anomalies you have in this country are democracy and are developed in China.
Sorry, Oyus, can you hear me?
Yes.
All right, can you come again? You were freezing a while.
Okay. I said, Muyiwa, as a political scientist, I want to ask you that are you refuting the claim that democracy is either endogenously or exogenously related to development? That is one. And when you talk about the China being a communist state and being developed this way, have you studied the economic structure of China, the other countries, Saudi Arabia, and the United Arab Emirates, and even Venezuela in the 50s? Their economy was built on the oil wealth of a non-democratic state, and from there they became a democracy. So, are you claiming that because these three countries are not democracies, the development can happen independent of a democratic state?
Well, I don't want us to make this a nursery platform to begin to talk politics or look at the issues. But let me quickly respond. Let me quickly respond to your question. My argument is that democracy can guarantee development, but it does not necessarily mean that when you don't have a democratic system of government in place, you become underdeveloped or less developed. I gave you instance of China, and I argued ab initio that the fact that China practices communism doesn't make it a better option. But in terms of
capitalist structure.
Now, relax. Now, forget economics. Political structure is a substructure. If China practices communism and it doesn't identify itself as a communist state and as a democratic state, and it does have the open, it defeats the whole essence of you arguing that democracy brings about development. I also mentioned Libya. Pre-Gaddafi, Libya was one of the most developed in Africa. Libya was never democratic. Go back to the Middle East. Most of those countries you have there aren't democratic. And that, for me, is just to back up my argument that the fact that you have democracy would never mean that you make progress as a country. What brings about development is different from your system of government. What democracy does is that it gives people the opportunity to ask questions. But that in instances where people cannot ask questions, it does not necessarily mean that you not develop as a people or as a country. What does matter, or what do matter in those instances, is the kind of leader you have in positions of authority. And very quickly, I'll give you another example. In Lee Kuan Yew, Singapore, for the major part of Singaporeans' political history, or Singapore's political history, Lee Kuan Yew was a dictator who ruled with the carrot and the stick. All the political economic transformation, if you like, that you have in Singapore today happened under Lee Kuan Yew. In Malaysia, for a very, very, very long time, the economic transformations that happened under in Malaysia happened under a non-democratic system. And there are examples of that all around the world. I am not arguing that this other alternative system of government are better than democracy. I'm only trying to say that for analysis' sake, that democracy does not necessarily beget development, but that what democracy does and what makes it better than other systems of government is that it allows the people the opportunity to ask questions, and it creates some sort of safeguard or checks and balances for leaders not to go haywire. So that said, we can then move forward to the discourse of the day. And your second question, I can't recollect now. What would that second question be?
So like you said, I mean, we're dragging on this. I guess we should just move. We'll come back to that maybe after the show. We can still have that conversation. But then, Victor, let me just come to you. I mean, Yaya and Olumuyiwa have been, having their own talk about what the correlation is between democracy and development. But then let's just look at ways now to move forward, because it seems we're let me not say pussyfooting, we're moving on a snail pace. How can we move faster? Victor.
How we can move faster?
Yes, please.
Olumewa Amao from New Zealand has made mention of some very important points to note, but I think the substratum of it all should be a change in our value system, because once the value system of the people remain the same, even if you build a structure, they will not maintain. And as you can find out in Zimbabwe, for instance, when the farms were collected from the white farmers and handed over to the locals, because of the value system that was greatly corrupted, that was there was so much dent in the value system, they couldn't maintain it. So I think that we need to reorientate the people, and until the people are educated, and that I don't mean by going to school, I mean politically and economically educated, and they begin to value, number one, life. Because in Nigeria, for instance, or one would say in Africa, the emphasis on the value of life isn't there much. That's why you still find jungle system and jungle justice. In such cases, they value money and not life. And where people value money and not life, people can always buy their conscience, buy their vote, buy their trust, buy anything. And once the one who has the money is there, then the system cannot work. And that is why it's easy for the justice system in Nigeria now to sentence someone who stole a cube of Maggi to 50 years in prison. And people will be shouting fundamental human right from a serial government looter. So I think the first thing we need to do is to reorientate the people to change their value system. Once this value system has been changed, then with this new revitalized and energized value system, we can begin to build structures. And structures, I mean systems, can work independent of whoever is there. So I think I will align with what Olumewa said earlier, but by saying that the substratum of any system for any system to work, we need to change our value system as a people.
Well, let's wait and see how that will play out now, talking about changing the value system. Ben, for you, what do you think we should be doing so we can move forward?
Yeah, I will add to what Olumuyiwa have said earlier on. I think what we should do is to build strong institutions. We have ended up building strong men, and because we have strong men in the system, these strong men are in charge of public funds. public wealth is in their hands, so they can go on and bribe anybody they want to bribe. They can buy anybody they want to buy. They give peanuts to the electorate, and at the end of the day, the electorates are still the ones crying. But when we have strong institutions, I think a strong institution that nobody can manipulate, no matter how high and mighty you are, you just have to bow down to the system. I think we will begin to move forward. We'll begin to add more value to our democratic structure. And secondly, we should try to make our public office not too lucrative. You know, when our public system, our office is so lucrative, people go there and mess up. But where everybody wants to go in there, so you can do anything, you can kill to even get to power, and when you get there, you just want to stay there for the rest of your life. But when we have strong institution, a rule of we have a rule of law working, and the whole electorate is, the whole electorate who knows their onion and their value knows that, at the end of the day, you will always fall back on them to come beg them for vote. And with the kind of democratic system we have, multi-party system, so at the end of your tenure, we know that at the end of your tenure, you will leave the office, and either we'll vote you out or we'll vote you in. So the power belongs to the people. So when we have strong men, and we don't have strong institution, we will continue to go back, and we will not develop.
Well, I don't think that's what we want to see. But Victor is saying that he believes systems are built and maintained by people. Well, we're about wrapping up. Olumiwa, let me also get your own closing remarks before we go.
Well, over the last 5 decades, Africa has not fared too badly when we look at our history with democracy. Our history without democracy, we have fared pretty bad. What that teaches us is that democracy, after all, may be a very good system of government for Africans and for Africa. And the question would be, why can't we have a Singaporean example in Africa? Why can't we have a Chinese model of development in Africa? And the answer to that would be, again, as my colleagues have said, we have strong men in Africa, in the negative terms, if I'm allowed to add. In other climes, we had strong men in positive terms, strong men who had so much love for their country, so much passion for their country, and for them, country first has always been the case. What happens in Africa is my family first, myself first, and then my people can go and die, if I may use that word in the words of one of the ex-governors of one state in Nigeria. So moving forward for Africa, I think that what needs to improve is the level of involvement of the masses, or perhaps the followership must continue to put the leadership on its toes. And people must not be carried away by their economic conditions and refuse to participate in government or perhaps in governance, even if you cannot, even if you don't have the resources to take up political positions or perhaps contest for an election. You must have that resource or those resources to be able to vote and make sure that your vote counts. And we have seen examples of that in some African countries. We've seen it happen in Tanzania. We saw it happen in Nigeria. The Gambia presents us another good opportunity. And we have seen what is happening in Tunisia after the revolution. Egypt is neither here or there, because nothing has really changed. But there are signs, telltale signs, that if the people decide those to govern them, and if they recognize that responsibility and that power as a strength, we can make progress as a people. So I would admonish us as Africans to continue to ask and demand for answers to our questions, to continue to believe that those who are leaders are accountable to us, and make commitments to us, making sure that they become truly accountable. If we can do that, if the level of followership commitment in Africa or in governance in Africa can improve, I see Africa in the next 20, 30 years making very giant strides. At the moment, are we doing well? Yes. Can we do better? Certainly. And I do hope, as an African, that things would change for good and would continue to progress as a continent that is so rich, yet so poor. That's the political and economic irony we've had. But can we change it? Obviously, we can. Is democracy a better way of changing it? I think so.
All right. Well, we definitely will share in your optimism. But then, Always, let me also come to you and then get your own closing remarks before we go finally on the program today.
Yeah, okay, thank you very much. Well, I would say that democratically, Africa as a continent is more conscious and more aware of its rights and the wave of this that is happening and less likely to know more smaller
Sorry,
countries.
can you come again? We lost you there for a minute.
We are getting of consciousness that Africans are beginning to be conscious of their right to be represented and their right to the right of their leaders to be responsive to them. It's likely to snowball from the more bigger economies to less African countries. And another major factor that is also going to ensure that will bring about development in Africa is the intertwined nature of the global economic structure we have today. If a leader decides to cling to power and not succeed or hold effective and credible elections, there's a likelihood that there are most likely to be cut out from some global economic benefits. If you look at Zimbabwe, for example, economic. So with these structures that are in place internationally and of presidential security that we enjoy in Africa, in this direction, I strongly believe that yes, we are not there yet, but we have prospects, and someday hopefully we Africans will be able to enjoy the democracy that our forefathers have fought for us during the independence.
All right, very well then. Thank you very much. Always to join us from Nigeria. That's Abuja, the Federal Capital Territory. Thanks for coming on the program and sharing your thoughts. Olumiwa, you joined us from Dunedin in New Zealand as well. Thank you for joining us and sharing your thoughts. We also have Ben Cosmos, who joined us from Kuala Lumpur in Malaysia. Thanks for coming on board. And we also have Victor Bamishaye, who joined us from Lviv in Ukraine. It's been a wonderful experience talking to all of you, but then that's where we have to wrap it up. We can go on and go on and go on, but then we're out of time and we have to stop here. Again, it's a Google Plus Hangout for Channels Beam, and I'm Victor Matthias.